This footage captures the last ever public appearance of Hollywood sex therapist Amie Harwick before her murder.
She died in 2020 after plunging from her bedroom balcony to the pavement below.
In February of 2020, a subsequent investigation into her death will require police to go back years in time, revealing a spine-chilling truth that the same night this footage was taken, her killer was just feet away, and he'd been watching her for almost a decade. This is the story I've avoided telling for a long time, not because it wasn't important, but because it was too important. I've received countless requests to cover it, and every time I paused, because this case, it stays with you, it haunts you, and for me, it was personal. I've told many stories on this channel, but never have I felt so deeply connected to a victim, so heartbroken, so angry, as I did with Amie. Telling her story isn't just reporting a crime. It feels like carrying a piece of her pain. And today, I'm finally ready to carry it with you.
Welcome to Quid. Here we share solved and unsolved cases. We hope that by sharing these stories, we all become more aware of the types of crimes that happen around us. And by doing so, we become smarter at detecting and hopefully preventing similar crimes. Let's get started.
The call came in at 3:47 a.m. A woman's scream, then silence. But this wasn't random. It was the climax of a 10-year obsession. Amie Harwick had once stood before millions, a well-known family and relationship therapist.
This is Dr. Amie Harwick, licensed marriage and family therapist.
Respected for her intelligence, empathy, and tireless advocacy.
I knew her as this gorgeous fire dancer model.
A woman with a vibrant personality and a passion for the darker corners of human psychology. Amie had built a life that was a testament to self-empowerment. Yet on the night of February 14th, 2020, just hours after celebrating Valentine's Day with friends, Amie's life would end in a violent and tragic turn that no one saw coming.
Amie Harwick spent her last night alive on February 14th, 2020, Valentine's Day.
Amie Harwick was no stranger to the limelight. A published author, renowned therapist, and outspoken advocate for survivors of abuse, she had earned the admiration of countless people across the globe. But beyond the accolades and public appearances, Amie was also someone who lived boldly. Her style, her interests, and her life reflected a woman who refused to be confined by societal norms. She was a go-go dancer by night and a therapist by day. A woman who embraced her quirks and celebrated her unique interests. From taxidermy to fire eating, it was this very spirit, this boldness, that would lead her to a toxic and ultimately deadly relationship with Gareth Pursehouse. Gareth, a tall, charismatic man with aspirations of comedy, had entered Amie's life years earlier. They met in 2010, and their whirlwind romance seemed full of promise at first. But over time, Gareth's charm began to give way to possessiveness. Amie's friends saw the warning signs: his obsession with her, his frequent boundary violations, and his subtle manipulation. Despite breaking up with him in 2011, Amie could never truly escape his grasp. For years, Amie's life was marred by Gareth's relentless harassment. His digital stalking, tracking her every move online, sending hundreds of unwanted messages, and showing up at her home unannounced, became an unrelenting shadow. Amie filed restraining orders, changed her locks, and did everything she could to maintain a safe distance. But Gareth's obsession only grew stronger. By February of 2020, Amie was no longer the same woman who had once felt trapped in Gareth's toxic web. She had rebuilt her life, focusing on her career, her friends, and her personal growth. She had even found love with Drew Carey, the beloved comedian. But despite her outward confidence, a quiet fear still lingered, an understanding that Gareth would never truly leave her alone. The night of February 14th, 2020, began like any other. Amie out with friends in Hollywood, celebrating Valentine's Day at a burlesque show, wearing a pink velvet bodycon dress, her dark eyes sparkling with laughter and life. She had even posted on social media about the importance of platonic love, an ironic sentiment given the horror that awaited her. At 1:02 a.m., she sent her last message to a friend. "Send me the pictures of the green couch." That simple message would be the last sign of life anyone would get from Amie Harwick. As the clock ticked past 1 a.m., the scene inside Amie's Hollywood Hills home was far from peaceful. Her roommate, Michael Herman, awoke to the sound of glass shattering, followed by screams. Amie's screams.
Like a dish or glass dish like falling to the floor.
And where were you when you heard this?
I was downstairs.
Did it wake you up, or were you already awake when you heard the sound?
No, it woke me up.
It was that loud?
Yeah.
Panicked, he rushed to investigate, his heart racing as he scrambled to find his phone. He could hear the struggle, the violent sounds of bodies crashing against furniture. The unmistakable sound of Amie's terror pierced the night.
No, I just heard her screaming. I threw him to the ground. I've been calling for her. There's windows open. He's answering nothing.
Terrified, Michael shouted up the stairs, "Leave her alone!"
Tell the jury, what exactly is it that you heard?
It sounded like Amie's voice screaming like blood-curdling screams.
Could you tell what she was screaming?
It was just loud. It screams. I thought she saw a mouse, literally. Like, as crazy as that sounds, that's like the only time I've heard a girl scream like that.
He ran outside, climbing a metal fence to reach a neighbor's house, hoping to find someone who could help. It wasn't until he was outside, frantically pounding on doors, that someone finally called 911. The police arrived at 1:16 a.m. They found Amie's body crumpled beneath the balcony, barely clinging to life. She had been strangled before being thrown over the edge.
Listen, sir, you need to relax a little bit so that we can get all the information, okay?
Okay.
So how are you planning on getting back in here?
Her body covered in bruises. Emergency responders rushed her to the hospital, but she was pronounced dead at 3:26 a.m. The investigation that followed would uncover the horror that had been unfolding in Amie's life for years. It was no accident. This wasn't a random attack. The killer had been stalking Amie for years, and that night, he made his final move. Surveillance footage from the neighborhood revealed a white man dressed in black, Gareth. He had been in Amie's neighborhood at 8:53 p.m., tampering with security cameras. 4 hours later, he returned, creeping through the shadows of her property, waiting for her to return. At 1:11 a.m., he attacked. He had planned everything, laying in wait, hiding in the dark, knowing exactly when Amie would come home. He knew how to trigger her anxiety, how to push her fear to the breaking point. And when she arrived, alone and vulnerable, he pounced. Detectives quickly identified Gareth as the prime suspect. He had been a fixture in Amie's life years earlier, and despite the restraining orders and multiple attempts to escape his grip, he had never truly let her go. He had been following her movements, monitoring her social media, and tracking her every step. The obsession had consumed him, and now it had cost her life. But who was Gareth Pursehouse? A man who seemed harmless at first. He had played the part of the charming, goofy software engineer with a dream of comedy stardom. But behind the facade lay a dangerous obsession. Over the years, Gareth had tried to reconcile with Amie, sending her hundreds of messages, showing up uninvited, and engaging in bizarre behavior that left those around her uneasy. Even Amie's friends began to notice his disturbing obsession. Gareth had never been able to accept that Amie had moved on. His manipulations, his gifts, his threats, All of it was part of a twisted narrative he had built in his mind. The relationship he thought they should have had continued to exist only in his delusional grasp. His obsession became his sole purpose, and in the end, it was his obsession that killed Amie. The aftermath was filled with shock and grief. Amie's friends and family, devastated by the loss of a woman who had touched so many lives, spoke out. They remembered her not just for her work, but for her kindness, her humor, and her ability to make others feel seen and heard. Amie's legacy was one of empowerment and self-acceptance, and her death was a stark reminder of the dangers of obsession and the fragility of human relationships. If you think this story is wild, before we continue, our next case is about this 22-year-old girl that vanished after a night out with a family friend. The last person seen with her, a family friend, now the target of an international manhunt, a casino, a truck, a desert, and a trail of lies so twisted it almost stayed buried. This is the murder of Leslie Palacio. And once you know the truth, you'll never forget it. Subscribe now. You're going to want to hear every detail. As the trial unfolded, it was clear that Gareth had no remorse for his actions. His defense team attempted to paint him as a man who had snapped, driven to violence by his own depression. But the jury saw through the lies. They saw the years of stalking, the threats, and the obsessive behavior that had built up over time. They saw the truth. Gareth had murdered Amie in cold blood, driven by his own twisted need for control. And in the end, the jury found him guilty of first-degree murder. For those who loved Amie, her death was a devastating blow. Her friends, family, and colleagues mourned the loss of a woman who had given so much of herself to others. But even in the wake of her death, Amie's legacy lived on. The tragedy of Amie Harwick's death serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of obsession and the importance of listening to the warnings of those who are being stalked and abused. The scars of her past, the fears she lived with, and the betrayal she suffered at the hands of Gareth will never be forgotten. But in the end, Amie's story is also one of strength, resilience, and love. A love that will continue to inspire others long after her death. Thank you for watching. See you on the next one.